My family kicked me out for seducing my brother-in-law, but when my grandfather died, he left me $750K and a letter that destroyed my greedy parents forever. I'm 22 years old, studying business administration at college, and I need to tell this story because what happened a few months ago basically destroyed my family. Or well, revealed who the people I grew up with really were. The truth is, I'm still having trouble processing it all. You know, because one thing is being accused of something you didn't do, but something completely different is having your own parents believe you're guilty without even listening to you. And on top of that, discovering it was all about money. I guess I should start from the beginning, when things still seemed normal. Or at least what I considered normal at the time. I grew up in a pretty traditional household, let's say, with parents who were always very worried about appearances and what people would think of us. My older sister Megan was always the golden child. Literally. Like everything she did was perfect. And I was always in her shadow. You know what I mean? She married Kenneth like 3 years ago, when I was 19 and still in my sophomore year of college, and from that moment my parents treated him like he was the son they never had. Kenneth worked in finance, made good money, always dressed impeccably, and basically was the perfect son-in-law for my parents who are obsessed with status and money. I honestly never paid much attention to him. I mean, he was my sister's husband, and that's it. Hello and goodbye when I saw him at family dinners. Nothing more. My relationship with my parents was always complicated. I don't know if tense is the right word, but it definitely was never like what they had with Megan. They're those kinds of people who control everything, like everything has to be perfect and according to their rules. And I was always more independent, more about doing my own thing. I studied away from home, lived on campus, and only saw them during breaks or special occasions. I had a boyfriend, Aaron, who lived in another state because he had already graduated and was working, so we saw each other when we could, but we got along super well. My parents were never very happy about that relationship because according to them, I should only concentrate on studying. But the truth is, Aaron was, and is, one of the best things in my life. The thing is, my grandparents, especially my grandpa, were always my refuge. They lived like an hour from my parents' house, in a big house my grandpa bought when he retired, and I spent a lot of time with them when I was a kid. My grandpa was amazing, you know, one of those people who actually listen to you and don't judge you for everything. He had worked his whole life, saved well, and had some properties, including one in Florida he bought years ago as an investment but basically never used. My grandma was quieter but just as loving, and her house always smelled like freshly baked cookies, literally, like something out of a movie. Everything started going to hell in December last year, right before my final exams. There were like 2 weeks left to finish the semester. I was super stressed studying for 4 important finals, and I got a call from my mom on a Tuesday night. Her tone of voice was weird, like cold and controlled, and she told me I needed to come home that weekend because they had to talk to me about something important. I asked if it could wait until after finals because I was literally in the worst study week, but she insisted no, that it had to be that weekend. I thought maybe someone was sick or something, so I canceled my study plans and drove the 3 hours to my house on Friday afternoon. When I got there, my parents and Megan were sitting in the living room, and Kenneth was there too, which I found strange because normally these family meetings were just us. My dad didn't even let me sit down before he started yelling at me. And when I say yelling, I mean yelling. Like the veins in his neck were bulging and everything. He accused me of flirting with Kenneth, of sending him inappropriate messages, of basically trying to seduce my sister's husband. I just stood there like an idiot because I literally had no idea what he was talking about. You know? Kenneth and I barely talked. Like at most we'd send each other birthday wishes through the family WhatsApp group and that's it. I tried to explain to them that I didn't know what they were talking about, that I hadn't sent Kenneth any weird messages, but my dad pulled out his phone and showed me screenshots of supposed messages from me, and that's when I realized something was super wrong because I hadn't sent those messages. They were messages from my number, yes, but the things they said, like comments about meeting up secretly and suggestive things, I would never write something like that. And I definitely would never send them to Kenneth, of all people. I told my dad someone had forged those messages, or something weird was going on. But he wouldn't even let me talk. He just kept yelling about how I had disappointed him, about how I was a disgrace to the family. Megan was crying on the couch, looking at me like I was a monster. And Kenneth had this expression of, I don't know, like an offended victim, saying he had never given me reasons to think there was something between us, that he loved Megan and didn't understand why I was doing this. My mom just shook her head, like disappointed but not surprised, as if she had always expected me to do something to embarrass them. I begged them to listen to me, to check my phone, to see that I hadn't sent those messages, but my dad told me I had 1 hour to pack my things and get out of his house, that they didn't want to see me again. I went up to my old room shaking, literally couldn't even breathe properly because I didn't understand what the hell was happening. I called Aaron crying and he told me to pack the most important stuff and get out of there, that we'd figure everything out later. I stuffed clothes, my college books, my laptop, and some personal topsization, things into 2 suitcases and a backpack. And when I came down, my dad was waiting at the door like a prison guard. He told me I was a disappointment, that I had destroyed the family, and not to contact them again. Megan didn't even look at me when I left. I drove to my grandparents' house crying the whole way, almost ran off the road like 3 times because I couldn't see well. I got there at 11 at night and knocked on the door. And when my grandma opened it and saw me there with the suitcases and my face destroyed, she didn't ask me anything, just hugged me and brought me inside. My grandpa came down in his pajamas and asked me what had happened, and when I told him the whole story, he believed me immediately. He didn't question anything, just said those messages sounded fake and something weird was going on, that Kenneth had probably manipulated everything to cover up something he was doing. I stayed with them, and the next day my dad showed up at their house, banging on the door, like crazy. My grandpa went out to talk to him on the porch, and I heard everything from the living room window. My dad demanded he kick me out, that I was a liar and a manipulator, and that if my grandparents gave me refuge, he would never speak to them again. My grandpa, who was like 5'7" and already 76 years old at that time, told my dad he was an idiot if he believed the perfect son-in-law more than his own daughter, and that if he wanted to break off relations over this, go ahead. But I would stay there as long as I needed. My dad left furious, literally burning rubber, and from that day my grandparents didn't speak to my parents again. The next few weeks were horrible. I managed to take my finals but got mediocre grades because I couldn't concentrate on anything. I spent the whole week thinking about how my own family had kicked me out without even giving me the benefit of the doubt. Aaron drove like 6 hours to come see me and stay the weekend. And honestly, I know what I would have done without him at that moment. My grandparents were incredible. They never made me feel like a burden. My grandma cooked my favorite meals, and my grandpa took me for walks in the afternoons so I could clear my mind. In January, like 3 weeks after all the drama, my grandpa had a massive heart attack. We were watching TV after dinner, and suddenly, he grabbed his chest and collapsed. The ambulance arrived in like 10 minutes, but it was too late. He died at the hospital like 2 hours later. It was devastating, literally one of the worst nights of my life, because he had been my biggest support through all this, and now he was gone. My grandma was destroyed. They had been married like 52 years, and suddenly she was alone in that big house. I tried to contact my parents to let them know, left like 5 voicemails and sent texts, but they didn't respond at all. The funeral was 4 days later, and they didn't show up. Nothing. They didn't even send flowers or a note. My grandma was so hurt, like it was her son who had just lost his father, and he didn't even have the decency to go to the funeral. We later found out from an aunt that my parents and Megan had been on a Caribbean cruise that week, literally on vacation while my grandpa was being buried. Like 2 weeks after the funeral, my dad showed up at my grandma's house, and he knocked on the door on a Saturday morning, and when I opened it, I froze. He came in without being invited. Megan and my mom were behind him, and they sat in the living room like nothing. My dad started with a speech about forgiveness and family, saying they had thought about things a lot and were willing to let me come back. That even though I had made a terrible mistake, they were good enough Christians to forgive me if I admitted what I had done and apologized. Honestly, I thought it was a joke. Like, after everything that had happened, did they really think I was going to get on my knees and admit to something I didn't do? I told them I had nothing to admit because I hadn't done anything wrong, and if they came to offer forgiveness, they could leave the way they came. My dad changed tactics then and started asking about the inheritance. Like, not directly at first, but it was obvious where he was going. He asked if my grandpa had left a will, if they had talked to any lawyer, things like that. That's when it clicked for me why they had really come. It wasn't about me or fixing things. It was about my grandpa's money. My grandma, who had been quiet until that moment, told them, yes, there was a will, and that Frank, my grandpa's lawyer and friend for decades, would take care of everything. My dad assumed that since he was the only son, he would inherit everything, and got all arrogant saying they needed to meet with Frank soon to arrange the papers. I let them keep thinking that. Didn't say anything. Just let them leave with their assumptions. The reading of the will was like a month later. Frank called us to his office, and my parents arrived like royalty. Literally, my dad was wearing a suit and everything, already mentally counting the money he was going to receive. Frank read the complete will. And basically, my grandpa left the house to my grandma so she could live there the rest of her life. Then it would pass to whoever she decided. And all the money from his savings, which was like $400,000 after selling some investments, he left to me. All of it. For my education and my future, the will said. My dad's face was, I don't even know how to describe it. Like he went from total confidence to shock and then to pure fury in like 5 seconds. He started yelling that it was impossible, that I had manipulated him, that I had surely poisoned him against them. All kinds of crazy accusations. Frank told him to calm down or he'd call security, and that the will was completely legal and had been made 2 years before all the drama started. So my parents had no argument of manipulation. My mom was crying, Megan was in shock, and I honestly didn't know what to feel. Like I was grateful to my grandpa, but also sad that he had to make that decision knowing what his own son was like. My parents decided to contest the will, hired a lawyer and everything. It was a horrible process that lasted like 3 months, with hearings and statements, and the whole time them sending me messages saying I was selfish, that I was destroying the family, that I would regret it. But here comes the best part, and I swear this is real. My grandpa had been a genius. In his will, there was a clause that said if anyone tried to contest it, that person would automatically inherit the Florida property, but with all the debts and legal obligations that came with it. Turns out that Florida property was basically a disaster. It had like $80,000 in back taxes, city fines for building code violations, and was in an area that had been declared a hurricane risk zone. So insurance was super expensive. My grandpa had left all that documented with Frank, like he knew exactly what he was doing. When my parents contested the will, they activated the clause and automatically became owners of that property with all its debts. The judge dismissed my parents' case because the will was solid and legal, and also informed them about the Florida property and all the financial obligations that came with it. My dad literally turned white in the courtroom when the judge started reading the list of debts. He tried to renounce the inheritance, but it was too late. The clause was clear. The moment they contested the will, they automatically accepted that property with everything it implied. The next few months were a nightmare for them, according to what I found out later. They started receiving collection letters. The city of Florida sued them for the fines, and they had to hire lawyers there to try to resolve the whole mess. They spent like $50,000 just on legal fees, and still had the tax and fine debt left. They tried to sell the property, but nobody wanted it with all those burdens. So they were basically trapped, paying for something that only gave them problems. During all this time, Megan sent me messages from time to time, like kind of trying to make peace but without admitting they had been wrong. She said things like, the family should be united, that we should forget the past, but never, not even once, did she apologize to me or admit they had treated me horribly. I ignored her most of the time. Honestly, didn't have the emotional energy to deal with that while finishing my last year of college and processing everything that had happened. Then, like in May, about 6 months after all the initial drama, Megan called me crying. At first I thought she was going to ask me for money or something. But no, she was really crying. Like sobbing so hard she could barely talk. She told me she needed to see me, that she had discovered something and that I had been right all along. I agreed to meet her at a neutral cafe, not at my grandma's house because I didn't want to bring drama there. When she arrived, her eyes were super swollen and she was wearing workout clothes, like she hadn't even gotten ready to go out. She told me she had found Kenneth's phone unlocked while he was in the shower, something that never happened because he was super jealous of his privacy and had seen messages with a woman. When she opened the complete conversation, she found that Kenneth had saved this woman's contact under my name in his phone. The messages my parents had shown me were real, but they weren't mine. They were from his lover, and he had used my name to cover up the affair if Megan ever checked. Megan was destroyed, like sobbing in the cafe while telling me everything. She had confronted Kenneth and he had admitted everything, that he had been having an affair for like a year, that he had manipulated everything to blame me when Megan started to suspect, and that basically I was the perfect scapegoat, because I had always been the black sheep of the family. She told me she was sorry, that she should have believed me, that I was her sister and she had betrayed me in the worst way. Honestly, I don't know what I felt in that moment. Like it was a weird mix of vindication and sadness, because on one hand, I was proving I had always been right, but on the other hand, my sister was destroyed, and our relationship would probably never be the same. I told her I appreciated the apology, but that I needed time to process everything. That 6 months of being treated like trash by the whole family didn't erase with one conversation. She understood and told me she was going to leave Kenneth, that she would move in with my grandma if she accepted her because she had nowhere else to go. My grandma, who is literally an angel, accepted that Megan move in. Not immediately. Like she told her she needed to see she was really sorry. And it wasn't. Just because she needed a place to stay. But after a few weeks and several long conversations, Megan moved into the house with us. It was weird at first, super awkward. But little by little we started rebuilding something like a sisterly relationship. My parents found out through Kenneth that Megan knew the truth, and that's when everything exploded again. My dad went to my grandma's house furious, demanding that Megan go back to her husband, saying marriages take work and she couldn't just give up. Megan yelled at him for the first time in her life, told him he had destroyed his youngest daughter by believing a liar, that he had lost his father by being greedy, and that she wasn't going to stay in a marriage with a liar and a cheater just because he wanted to keep up appearances. My mom tried the victim approach, like crying and saying they had only wanted to protect Megan, that how were they supposed to know Kenneth was lying? My grandma, who almost never got angry, told her to get out of her house and not come back until she was ready to admit what she had done. It was intense. Like 30 years of resentment coming out all at once. Like 2 weeks later, my dad came back alone. He knocked on the door, and when my grandma opened it, he started crying. He asked forgiveness for everything, for being a terrible son, for not going to my grandpa's funeral, for believing Kenneth instead of his own daughter, for contesting the will out of pure greed. He told her he didn't expect her to forgive him, but he needed her to know he regretted it. He also told her he didn't want anything from the inheritance, that he had already learned the most expensive lesson of his life with that Florida property, and that he just wanted to have some kind of relationship with his family before it was too late. My grandma listened to him, didn't say much, just nodded and told him forgiveness would take time, but she appreciated that he had come. My dad asked to talk to me and I agreed, though, honestly, I was super nervous. He apologized to me, said he had been an idiot, that he had failed me as a father, and that he understood if I could never forgive him. He didn't ask me for money or anything related to the inheritance, just wanted to apologize. I told him I needed time, that I couldn't just forget everything that had happened, but that I appreciated the apology. Kenneth is in the process of divorcing Megan. My parents literally kicked him out of the family completely, like they don't even say his name anymore. He lost his job too because it turns out the woman he was having the affair with was his subordinate at the office. And when everything came to light, the company fired him for violating HR policies. Karma, I guess. My grandma told Megan a few weeks ago that she plans to leave her the house in her will, that after everything that happened, she deserves to have a safe place to live. Megan cried when she found out, like she's still processing all the trauma from the last year. But she's in therapy and improving little by little. We finished the semester taking online classes together. She started studying again because she had left college when she married Kenneth. My mom still hasn't completely given in. Like she came once to have tea with my grandma, but still hasn't directly apologized to me. My dad comes like once a month, brings flowers for my grandma and sits down for coffee, talking about superficial things but being respectful. I'm cordial with him, but our relationship is super damaged. I don't know if it'll ever be anything close to normal again. I used part of the money my grandpa left me to pay for the rest of my college, so I graduated debt-free, which is amazing. The rest is invested and basically is my emergency fund and to eventually buy a house. Aaron and I are still together. He was my rock during all this. And we're talking about moving in together next year when he gets a transfer to a city closer. Last week, I found a letter. My grandpa had left for me with Frank. That should only be delivered after the whole will thing was resolved. In the letter, he explained he knew what my dad was like, that he loved him, but also knew his defects, and that he wanted to make sure I was protected. He said he had seen how they treated me differently from Megan, how I was always trying to please my parents and it was never enough, and that he wanted me to have the freedom to live my life without depending on them. He also explained about the Florida property, said he knew my dad would probably try to contest the will, and that was his way of teaching him one last lesson about the consequences of greed. I cried reading that letter. Like I still read it when I feel lost or when I start doubting if I deserved all this. My grandpa believed in me when not even my own parents did, and that's something I'm going to carry with me always. I don't know if I'll ever have a normal relationship with my parents. Honestly, I doubt it. There are things that are said and done that just can't be erased, you know? But I'm learning that family isn't always blood. Like my grandma and Aaron are my real family now. The people who supported me when everything fell apart. Megan is trying to be better, and I value that. But I also understand that rebuilding that relationship is going to take years, not months. Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if none of this had happened. If Kenneth hadn't decided to use me as his alibi. If my parents had believed me from the beginning. If my grandpa was still here. But then I think maybe all this needed to happen for me to see who the people around me really were. It hurts. Obviously it hurts. But it also gave me clarity I never would have had otherwise. The truth is, I'm in a better place now than I expected to be a year ago. I have my degree. I have my financial independence. I have Aaron. I have my grandma. And I have a relationship rebuilding with Megan. It's not perfect. Nothing in life is. But it's mine and it's honest. And that's worth more than any perfect-looking family we had before. My grandpa gave me more than money with that inheritance. He gave me the possibility to start over without the chains of having to be who my parents wanted me to be. And for that, I'll always be grateful to him. Even though it hurts that he's not here to see how everything turned out.